We're here with Mally Morris in APT Studios in Deptford in the run-up to her exhibition at the Hatton Gallery in Newcastle. Can we talk a little bit about your show returning at the Hatton Gallery? Would you call it a retrospective?
Well, it sort of is, but I'm not calling it a retrospective because there wasn't the budget there to borrow works from collections, and on the principle that one day there might be a retrospective, I thought I would call this a review. But the work does go back to 1978. I studied there in the 60s. I arrived in 1963 from North Wales. It was a very exciting time to be at Newcastle in the department. Richard Hamilton and his team of some wonderful artists, teachers were there, and Newcastle was very exciting, and it was the 60s. So it feels great actually to be showing at the Hatton, which is a beautiful gallery in the department, not actually administered these days by the university, but inside the place that I studied at.
A lot of memories.
Yes, yeah.
And you did what was then the new first-year basic course that Richard Hamilton and Victor Pasmore had kind of put together?
That's correct. Sort of based on the Bauhaus, and it was one of the early courses. More and more of them cropped up, and it sort of became a basis of art education for eventually. But it was very radical at the time, and I think we all felt that it was radical. I certainly wasn't sure about what I was doing a lot of the time, or some of the time anyway, but it was an experience that sort of stayed with me, even now still, the things that sort of come back to me. I don't particularly want to be thought of as a painter where the basic course shows, but it was a foundation in being very analytical about what one did.
And was that a feature of the Bauhaus element, do you think?
Yes, I think so, that it was a sort of examination of the fundamentals of, well, in the Bauhaus it was design and architecture and painting and applied arts, but in the art schools here, I would say the fundamentals of visual art. So we were asked to examine the language that we were using or might be using in the future.
And after Newcastle, you went to Reading, where you did an MFA with Terry Frost, and
That's
I know
right.
He had a colour project. Can you say a bit
Yes,
about that?
the colour project actually was when he came to visit us at Newcastle, and that was when I first met him. And that's I've forgotten a lot about that period, but I really remember this project that he set when we brought in a flower or a fruit, and he asked us to mix our oil paint on a big glass palette to get all the colours we could possibly find in this growing thing with shadows and so on. And I think at first I thought there might not be that many, but of course the more you look, the more you find. And we were to mix the paint and just put dabs of this colour down. So not describe the form of the flower, but just put the colour down. And after a while, these dabs kind of formed into a sort of like a kind of cloud of movement, and that had a rhythm. I wasn't planning anything, I was just putting them down instinctively, I suppose. Mm-hmm. But also the different touches of colour made luminosity and kind of light. There was a sort of glow of light from it. I guess it's the fundamental of Impressionism in a way, but it was a revelation. And some of the things he said, he was a very good teacher as well as good artist, very good communicator. So he would say things like, "It's the colour, not the form you're after. You're not describing the world." That stayed with me.
Do you believe that?
I do, yes. I think painting, my abstract painting, it has everything to do with the world. My being in the world, so seeing the light of the world or moving through the space, but it doesn't describe it in a figurative way.
No. More of a sort of experiential feeling.
Yes, I suppose over the years, as the work evolves, I find ways of giving myself structures that allow this to happen through trial and error, really. One set of ideas gives me quite a few paintings. A phrase that I often repeat to myself or tell people that I use as a mantra is what if I did it this way, or what if I didn't do it this way, what if I did it a slightly different way. So they're not so much a series implies something too preordained in some way, but they're like families of paintings that are related, and then they kind of move on into another group. There's this kind of slow sort of evolving, but there's always something fundamentally about that light and space and pictorial liveliness of pictorial activity.
When you talk about movement, and that's probably what strikes me most about your work, is even though some of them have quite, not rigid, but fixed geometries underlying, there's just movement.
Oh, well, I like hearing that. Thank you. Yes, and pictorial liveliness, as a phrase I've just heard myself saying, it's kind of discovered in the course of making the painting, when I'm either doing something to complicate the work, or if I know that there's going to be glazing or layering, the colour can die on one, or the light can go, and the movement can go. So I suppose I'm always trying to rescue the work from something, becoming static or dull. The opposite of dull isn't necessarily bright, high key colour. I do work in tertiary colours sometimes, but yes, a kind of liveliness. So movement, yes, I like movement in the painting.
And how do you keep the movement if you do have a lot of layers? Is it to do with the translucency of the layers?
What intrigues me is that the surface is taut, that there's a kind of tension because the painting's flat, but it opens out either because of the forms that are in there, offering a kind of layering of forms, or there's a layering of swathes of colour. Sometimes I clear away, I make shapes by clearing wet paint to find what's underneath. And if I'm making paintings that are sort of predicated on that, I need to make sure that the foundations are there to give me the colour to find when I do dig around for it. So there might be patchworks of colour put down first, and when they're dry, I put the wet paint on. Over the years, that's kind of evolved from like a sort of all over one coat, big brush marks, into quite ornate grounds, so that the ground itself almost becomes the subject, and these clearings, I call them, of these little circular forms in that group of paintings anyway, they make a kind of constellation. I never get the constellation I want first time. I have to run down the corridor to the tap to put the painting, if it's small enough. I can't do it with the big ones. To get rid of that wet paint and start all over again on this checkerboard. And so that I might have to do that anything between 4 and 24 times before I get what I want. So there's quite a lot of planning in one way, but there's a lot of improvisation as well, or chance. And I like the dynamic between those two things. I can never plan for them. I don't ever think, today I'm going to be impulsive. It's just I'm impulsive when I need to rescue a painting or do something to improve it.
And can we talk a bit about the different scales that you work on?
If I have a new idea for a work, a new idea that's come from, say, the last series, I might try things out on a smaller scale. But somehow the scale has to fit the idea, and I seem to be working either on what I'd call small, which is kind of like this big.
Like the ones behind you?
Yes, yes, or occasionally much smaller, or those big ones. And I don't know, something like the difference between, a song and a symphony or something. The big ones that take a much longer time, and it's much more upsetting or even heartbreaking if they don't work. Whereas the small ones, I mean, they're not easier in a way, but it's less of a wrench if they don't work. And I also work on paper in acrylic. I used to do a lot more watercolour, but mostly acrylic on paper these days. And they investigate similar sort of preoccupations, but they're not studies for the paintings. It's just to give me a change. I think that's why I change scale. It's to give me a change. It's sort of take, the big ones feel like I'm embarking on a marathon. And I just don't want to do that all the time, and there's no need for them all to be big.
You mentioned works on paper, and you've actually got a second exhibition in Newcastle in
Yes.
parallel to this one, showing works with your partner,
Yes.
Stephen Lewis.
Yes, that was very nice. There seems to be a sort of tradition at the Hatton. Well, it's happened a few times. A show that I saw up there a few months ago was by the late Matt Rugg, a wonderful sculptor who taught me at Newcastle, and then I taught with him at Chelsea. And there was a show at the Hatton Gallery, and we discovered, Steve and I, when we went up there to see it, that there were works on paper of Matt's and maybe some small sculptures in this little gallery, a commercial gallery, which the Hatton isn't, very close by. And Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham, the late art painter, she had a show at the Hatton Gallery a couple of years ago, and they had works on paper. So it was suggested that we might do that. Steve showing some small sculptures. He too sometimes makes very big sculptures, but also small ones. We've shown, this will be the fourth time we've had a two-person show in our 40 years together. So it feels nice.
How much does your work interact?
I mean, we've known each other all these years, and so we've known each other's work all that time. And he works in this building at APT on the ground floor where the sculptors work with the yard for practical reasons. And so we don't discuss each other's work these days as much as we may be used to. I think maybe because we know each other so well, or think we do, and know the work. But we do look, and I think there's something about the way people look at work. It sort of speaks volumes. One of us I might go into Steve's studio and see one he's working on, and say, I don't know, what about that? What about that bit there? Are you going to change that? Which isn't me saying, I think you ought to change that. So a kind of discussion happens. So there's...
You said how many shows you've had with him over the years, but in 50 years, you've had 40 solo exhibitions.
Yes.
How? That seems an immensely prolific amount.
I'm not sure. Is it compared with some people? I'm not sure. Well, I've been painting a long time, and I'm 80 in February, and so I've been painting since I was a student, so that's a long time. And I was very lucky in the early days to have, I had a show in the Serpentine Gallery, which is it was a very different Serpentine Gallery from how it is now. There was a terrific programme of summer shows for a group of what people call these days emerging artists, people who hadn't shown much. Young, I don't know that age came into it at all, but anyway, these groups of about 5 or 6 people were selected by 3 artists, sort of team of artists or critics, and we were each given a room at the Serpentine Gallery, and I had a show in that central cupola gallery there, which was fantastic, and that led to a show at the Icon Gallery in Birmingham, which is a different building from the Icon as is now. So that was in 1979, I think. So that was a great start.
You still must be working at a prolific rate.
Yes, I don't know, I feel I'm sort of self-regulating in a way. I don't really like to work for shows. I don't really enjoy the pressure, but sometimes the deadline really does get you going. It's kind of the sort of the work itself. If there's something very kind of exciting to me that I'm in the middle of discovering, it sort of generates energy and work. But I'm at my happiest, I suppose, when I'm doing that. Yeah.
And it feels like it. I mean, your paintings just sort of make me happy when I look at them.
Oh, well, Anna, thank you.
But I mean, do you feel that it's positive energy? I mean, would you struggle to work if you were in a less good mood, or does that come through as well?
You know, I once heard Helen Frankenthaler in an interview say, this was a long time ago, so I won't remember it verbatim, but it was something about that when she was actually talking about her life, I think it was anecdotal, and she said, you know, when I was at my worst, you know, lowest ebb, and painted my, you know, most joyful painting. So, and I thought, oh yeah, I understand that. So I would say, I would guess that any, you know, shifting mood doesn't actually affect it feels, what I'm doing feels too much like structuring, although there's something certainly expressive about painting, inevitably, and I think that the unconscious has an awful lot to do with what surfaces or what emerges, but it being the unconscious, you're never quite sure what that is until maybe with hindsight. I mean, there are certainly, you know, bad days and good days, but that's often more to do with the paint not going down right, how you want it. I mean, I don't have an agenda to make work that has a mood. I mean, I know there are sort of, well, theories, I guess, about brightness of colour, you know, kind of relating to brightness of mood. But I don't really think like that. The colour relationships are more to do with sort of structuring space and light. And
at what point do titles get given to your work?
Ah, okay. Always after the painting. Sometimes they come fairly easily. Actually, these days, less and less so. I sort of struggle with them. I like poetry a lot, and sometimes a phrase might stay with me. And I think I said somewhere, wrote somewhere that I'm kind of quite blatant about, you know, borrowing or stealing. But if it's just 2 words, I think that there's no shame in that. But you know, I mean, there are instances when I think that maybe one example would be a couple of paintings that had a sort of mesh-like form in, and Elizabeth Bishop is one of my favourite poets, and I sort of remembered a poem that had mesh in it, and I found it easily, and so I used I can't remember what the title is now, but used 2 words, one of them being mesh, dark mesh, I think it was. So it's language. So the language of the title doesn't describe the painting, it doesn't give it meaning, but it's kind of, well, I suppose it's like naming a child. You know, a child has to have a name. Paintings can be given numbers, but I think it's nice to give them some kind of a name. But so it's an invitation to come into the painting, but I really don't want it to be too literal, and to, you know, be seen to give clues to meaning in a literal way. But I suppose that, you know, the language of the title, I hope, suits the language of the painting somehow.